Mr. Calamel, welcome to Q News special coverage on Trump's inauguration day. Let me ask you first, what are the most immediate foreign policy challenges Trump is likely to encounter?
Thank you for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Foreign policy-wise, you're hitting right on the nail on the head. The one that comes right up at the top is the Ukraine-Russia conflict. How is that resolved? How do you deal with that? This is a war that's been dragging on for quite a while. So there's that. There's the Islamic Republic, and we can pivot back to them in a little while. But we're going to see Trump's maximum pressure campaign being enforced on the Islamic Republic from day one. And that could alter the shape of the Middle East because, in most people's estimation who watch this closely, the Islamic Republic is the source of a lot of the chaos and chaos in the region, create chaos and then fill vacuums. Now, the third threat, now Trump is playing it kindly here. He talks about working in a new world order or trying to work with China to create a better world. He has to understand, I think he knows this, that China is working against us at all times. We are not their friend. They are not ours. They consider us the enemy. We need to start looking at them kind of in the same way. So when you put pressure on the Islamic Republic, Russia, or China, you're going to impact one of them because the three of them all work together with sharing resources, buying, let's say the Russians run short on ballistic missiles, drones in the Ukraine. What do? They start purchasing from the Islamic Republic. So you put pressure in one place and you can see results in another place. But again, Biden administration, they did put sanctions in place. They did not remove Trump's sanctions, but it's a matter of enforcement. The Trump administration will enforce sanctions because sanctions aren't any good. You can place as many executive orders, sanctions, unless you're enforcing them, they don't mean anything. Mm-hmm. And that's how the Islamic Republic's gotten rich over the last 4 years, by trading oil to China.
Well, let's start with the ongoing war in Ukraine, and we'll start off with NATO. Now, how might Trump's approach to NATO and U.S. alliances evolve in his early days as president?
Well, with Trump, we have to look at it. A lot of his approach, he says things, he messages things, and I think it's him. It's calculated. It's to put it out there. It's to get people thinking. It's to put pressure on them. With NATO, I think one of the big problems with NATO, as far as Trump sees it, and we have to remember the Ukraine conflict happened after Trump. So NATO, when Trump was in office, 2016, he's kind of looking at it saying, okay, is this still a useful organization, number one, and how much is the United States putting towards this compared to our allies? Then you look at the Ukraine conflict kick off, and it's the Europeans that are really leading it, and it's the American administration that's behind in following NATO's recommendations from the Brits, from the French, you name it. So my hope is that they will work together, restore a collective deterrence, because that's what's needed against pariah nations such as Russia, and then put economic pressure on Russia, and you can do that in a various number of ways, and a lot of it comes back to enforcement of the sanctions that are already in place, and Ukraine has to come out looking like the winner in this war. This is important for Western civilization. Russia, China, the Islamic Republic, Pakistan, Venezuela, they need to know that they can't invade other countries and just get away with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this will be the first time, actually, Trump addresses the Ukraine ongoing war as president. Now, what steps could Trump take to address the war in Ukraine, and how realistic are his promises of a quick resolution? You've mentioned economic pressure on Russia, but would that actually help reach some sort of a resolution for the ongoing war in Ukraine, or are there other measures as well?
Oh, that's a great question. And, Trump's going to, I'll go to this. Trump's going to issue back in an era of what I would call smart power. And it's using economic leverage. And then the United States has enormous economic leverage. And then kinetic activity, military activity, on the margins. So in the Ukraine, I don't know how Trump's going to view this, but he and Putin seems to be an individual that he's willing to stay in the fight for the long run, no matter how many bodies it takes, even to the point where he's brought in 300,000 North Korean soldiers to solve his manpower problem. So Trump needs to make it clear to him that Putin, you can keep your throwing people at this, but you are never going to win this. And one way to do this is to hurt him financially and also to give the Ukrainians a little more offensive firepower, which they've been lacking from the beginning. It's all been defensive. Putin will see this and say they mean business. This is something to be concerned about. He will go screaming to everybody about, oh, they're putting this, this plane in, this defense system, this type of missile. But at the end of the day, Putin's been breaking every single rule that you could possibly imagine. And Ukraine has pretty much been on the defensive. They launch a counteroffensive, and that's where it gets bogged down. It's these counteroffensives that someone needs to realize that, okay, what's the end game for this? What's Ukraine's end game? Do they take back the territory during this last invasion? Do they take back Crimea? Do they take back? There needs to be some type of resolution. There's going to be land involved, and that's where the big sticking point is.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Calamel, you mentioned the China file as one of the main foreign relations priorities for Trump. Now, how will Trump's stance on China impact U.S. trade and security policies in the short term?
I think Trump's going to do. He is going to be feeling them out. He's going to be watching them, making these. It's going to be almost mixed messaging. It's going to be kind words, and then it's going to be strong words. Once again, the United States has enormous economic leverage that it needs to use. We also need to partner with our allies in that region, specifically Japan, North Korea, which we already do. But you see that relationship with Japan continuing to grow, and he needs to foster that relationship. With China, you can also hurt them in a number of ways by, one, enforce the sanctions on the Islamic Republic. The Chinese economy needs oil to grow, and they bought basically $200 billion in Iranian oil over the last 4 years. This cannot be allowed to happen. So you put pressure on them that way, and the other thing is you got to make it clear to them that any move on Taiwan is a call to war.
Well, his immigration policies have been quiet under the spotlight during his first term as president, but now as we are embarking on a second term, what domestic hurdles might Trump face in implementing these immigration policies?
That's another great question. And yes, domestic and immigration is right at the top of issues for Americans. And there's a number of reasons why. If you look at the crime, especially in what you call sanctuary cities, where people have been given so to roll it back a bit, Maduro in Venezuela, he just opened up his jails and let everybody out. And there's been these caravans coming into the United States. And in these caravans, there's been lots of criminals that have just gotten across a lot, that have committed heinous crimes in cities such as Houston, New York City. People that had been arrested, deported, and then came back and committed these crimes. So that's what the Americans population's looking at. Is there needs to be some type of restoration of law and order, and law coming across the border illegally is immediately breaking the law before you even enter the country. So that's the other thing. For me, as a person who follows terrorism, closely analyzes terrorism, this is very concerning, the southern border, because I know over the last year, at least 200 individuals who are on the terrorism watch list were caught. Now, how many actually slipped through? The numbers, no one's quite sure, but there's a concern that there is an attack coming. A lot of people have flown through the southern border using that, as well as the northern border as well. Now, can Trump implement any type of policies to stem this? Absolutely. Building the fence may not be it. That may take a lot of work and time, but put troops on the border. Make sure that people are not crossing. If they are crossing and they've got a record in South America or they got a record in America, they do not get across. That needs to be step number one. And I know he talks about the deportations. That's that's going to be a much bigger and larger task and much more difficult to solve. But it is solvable. It is something that he can absolutely do.
That was the international relations expert, Mr. Adrian Calamel from New York. Thank you very much, sir, for joining our live coverage here on Q News.